This week, the Dirty Bits podcast was downloaded over 1,000 times, and we wanted to extend a big thank you to all of the lovely new friends we've made who've helped make that possible. A special thank you to our biggest fan, Mary Virginia, and to our other fans, Sophia, Jody, Aaron, Nika, Samantha, Heather, Kimberly, Dwight, Stephanie, Maria, Kelly, and Megan. A big thank you to our international fans, Lisa Marie all the way in Germany, Glynis and all the folks in the Emergency Admissions Department in the UK, and thank you to Dave, who's also in the UK. And be sure to check out our favorite podcast we're listening to right now, the True Crime Fan Club podcast, Pleasing Terrors, Podcasts We Listen to, The History Dweebs, Fairy Tales for Unwanted Children, Beyond the Playlist with J. Hammond C, Film Roast, Nerds with Words, The Brain Trust Podcast, Is This Adulting?, The Braless Podcast, Historical Blindness, History Bastards, and History Unplugged. Stay tuned after the show to hear a special promo from Adam and Greg, hosts of one of our favorite podcasts, Nerds with Words. Hi, I'm Tawny Plattis, and you're listening to Dirty Bits, the podcast that explores the dirty bits of history your teacher probably left out. Jack Parsons was a self-taught rocket engineer who invented solid rocket fuel and founded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which was eventually absorbed by NASA. He was also a chemist and an occultist who threw crazy-ass orgies in the desert and had strong, intimate connections to Aleister Crowley and L. Ron Hubbard. Jack Parsons was born in 1914 in Pasadena and was originally named after his father, Marvel, until his wife caught him cheating with a prostitute and started calling him Jack instead. She also filed for divorce. So Jack's wealthy grandparents swoop in to save the day, and they buy a house on Millionaire's Mile where the entire family lives together in luxury, surrounded by servants. And Jack's a nerdy, effeminate kid who gets bullied and doesn't make friends, so he gets lost in books, particularly Arabian Nights, much like Hans Christian Andersen. Then one day, when he's 13, he summons Satan in his bedroom. For reals, he was absolutely positive that the devil was successfully in his room that night. And that experience ushers in his lifelong interest in the occult. He eventually meets his best friend for life, Edward Foreman, who sticks up for him against his bullies and was also into sci-fi and rockets. So they start blowing shit up in their backyard as kids, and they take on the motto, through hardship to the stars. John was a total pyro. He got terrible grades in school, and he was shipped off to San Diego's Brown Military Academy for Boys, where he was promptly expelled for blowing up the toilets. So he goes to this alternative hippie school, and he does great because he's brilliant, but he's just a little different. And these teachers who had connections at Caltech were like, this kid's good, and they help him develop his chemistry skills. Then Jack gets the perfect job working at Hercules Powder Company, where he learns about explosives and the potential they have in rocket propulsion. Jack steals a bunch of stuff from work and keeps testing out different rockets, eventually constructing a solid fuel rocket engine. He meets a bunch of other students at Caltech, and they work together developing rockets and explosives. But he pisses off his colleagues because he's not serious and he's also kind of a dick. He plays pranks on his coworkers by detonating explosives like firecrackers and smoke bombs. So because of all these dangerous experiments, they became famous on campus, and people call them the Suicide Squad, just so you know where that originates. But Jack is smart and entertaining as hell, so they all hang out anyway, and they get crossfaded and write movie scripts with overt anti-capitalist and pacifist content. He subscribed to the People's Daily World and joined the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, which made him give off this super commie vibe at the time. So he's just running around being the James Dean of rocketry until he meets Helen Northrup at a local church dance. And she's the kind of woman Jack felt you proposed to with a pistol, so that's what he did in July 1934. And he must have been right because she said yes. And a few years later, in 1939, they go with a couple of friends to this Thelema church that's called Ordo Templi Orientis. It's this place in Hollywood, which was run by Aleister Crowley, the famed sex magical occultist. Jack watched the members perform the Gnostic Mass, and it really freaked him out. They consume this Eucharist-type thing at the end of the ritual called the Cake of Light that may or may not have been made with either menstrual blood or semen. Crowley's recipe for the Cake of Light in his Book of Law instructs the baker in the final step to soften and smooth down with rich, fresh blood. And then he goes on to say, "The best blood is of the moon, monthly, then the fresh blood of a child, or dropping from the host of heaven, then of enemies, then of the priest, or of the worshippers, last of some beast, no matter what." So Jack has this weird repulsion attraction thing going on with this occult group, but he eventually becomes initiated into the church, and he starts to believe magic is a force that could be explained through quantum physics, but it cannot. And he's really into the whole sex magic thing, and he's a very devoted disciple. So devoted, in fact, that when Helen is on vacation, he starts sleeping with her 17-year-old sister, Sarah. When Helen gets back and Jack goes, "Your younger sister is way hotter than you, and you know our occult churchy thing is all about this non-monogamy, so I'm totally fine and you need to accept it," she's like, fuck you, I'm going to be with one of the higher-ups in this Thelema thing then. And she ends up being with the occultist Wilfred Talbot Smith, and eventually gave birth to his son and named him Quen Lanville Parsons. And everyone ends up staying friends because they don't want it to be awkward at home, where they all live together in a commune and slaughter their own animals for meat, in addition to your standard blood rituals. Jack eventually becomes head of the organization, and he was handpicked by Aleister Crowley to succeed him when the time came to run this lodge-type thing where all these magic-practicing occultists live together. And he decorates the home with knives and swords. He welcomes house guests over with this large pet snake wrapped around his neck. He dresses up a mannequin in a tuxedo with a bucket that says "The Resident" on the front, and he uses it as a mailbox. He would also spend hours playing with his toy boats in the bathtub. Jack was a notorious skirt chaser and womanizer, well known for flirting and hooking up with multiple staff members at his place of work. Like, he hooked up with a good friend and coworker's fiancée and then paid for her to have an abortion. And then they weren't friends after that for some reason. He used coke, meth, peyote, and opiates on a daily basis, and once wrote a poem that went, "I hate Don Quixote, I live on peyote, marijuana, morphine, and cocaine. I never knew sadness, but only a madness that burns at the heart and brain." So because of all this, some of the old-timers at the lodge, as they called their commune, weren't too happy with the Jack Parsons factor going on. They thought he was excessive in his sexual freedom and found it was detrimental to the religion. He was also discriminatory in who he would allow to live at the lodge. For instance, one article for an occultist fan magazine said, in the ads placed in the local paper, Jack specified that only bohemians, artists, musicians, atheists, anarchists, or any other exotic types need to apply for rooms. Any mundane soul would be unceremoniously rejected. Unfortunately, all of this weekend spell casting began to affect his work, and his personal life begins to take a toll on his professional one. He'd come into work hungover on 2 hours of sleep because he was having orgies the night before that he would invite his colleagues to, which they were definitely not okay with. And people started talking like, "You guys, we need to figure out how to get Jack out of here. He's super weird." His neighbors started reporting that there's a black magic cult on their street that's hosting orgies and crazy-ass rituals. Like, they were accused of having a naked pregnant woman jumping through a fire in a satanic sex ritual because that's pretty much what was going on. And the lodge came under investigation by the police department and the FBI. But Jack's like, no, you got it all wrong. We're simply an organization dedicated to religious and philosophical speculation. And the investigating teams couldn't find any evidence the occult practitioners were doing anything illegal, so they had to drop the case because adults playing Harry Potter in their basement wasn't enough to be considered a national security threat. However, the FBI did make a little note next to Jack's name on his file that said he was potentially bisexual, just in case. Then one day, this guy moves into Jack's sex magic house, named Hubbard, and the two hit it off immediately. Jack wrote a letter to Aleister Crowley that even said, though Hubbard had no formal training in magic, he has an extraordinary amount of experience and understanding in the field. From some of his experiences, I deduce he is in direct touch with some higher intelligence, possibly his guardian angel. He is the most thelemic person I have ever met and is in complete accord with our own principles. So in December 1945, Jack begins doing these Enochian magic rituals where he jerks off onto magical tablets, calling his dick a wand, while Sergei Prokofiev's second violin concerto was played in the background, and Hubbard chanted and jotted down notes. But Jack wasn't the only one who liked Elron. His wife was such a fan she started sleeping with him. So even though they're all supposed to be practicing polyamory, Jack is bananas jealous and decides he needs to conjure up a new girlfriend with some black magic. Supposedly all this creepy shit starts happening. Like, Jack says after he started the rituals, there was poltergeist activity. He saw orbs and ghostly forms, there was weird weather, and he said he heard disembodied voices. One biographer suggests they were likely pranks, courtesy of Elron and Sarah, on an extremely stoned out of his gourd Jack. But Elron continues helping him with his rituals to incarnate the goddess Babylon on Earth. Babylon would be a stunning redhead who would give birth to the Antichrist, and also be Jack's girlfriend. So they're out in the Mojave Desert jerking off onto like Ouija boards, and Jack suddenly goes, "Stop, we're done, pack it up, let's go home." And Elron is like, okay. So they go back home, and there's this woman visiting named Cameron who has brilliant red hair. And Jack stops and goes, "Oh my God, that's her. That's Babylon. You're my elemental sex goddess." And Cameron is a beatnik artist, and she's like, "Yeah, okay, sure, I don't know anything about this, and I feel the vibes, though. You're cute. I'll sleep with you." Jack calls her his Scarlet Woman, and they began doing sex magic rituals while Elron watched and kept taking notes and doing his thing. They had read this book by Aleister Crowley called Moonchild, and they were trying to immaculately conceive a child somewhere on Earth while they had magic sex. Unfortunately, they don't think it ended up working. So Sarah, who's in a relationship with both Elron and Jack, and is Helen's sister, if you remember, goes up to Jack one day and is like, "Hey, I need about 21 G's. I know that's your life savings, but hear me out. Let's use that money to go to Miami and buy not one, not two, but 3 yachts, which we will then sail through the Panama Canal to the West Coast, and then we'll sell them there for a profit. Isn't that a great idea?" And Jack goes, "Yeah, absolutely." And his friends are like, "That's a really terrible idea, man." And he's like, "I don't care, fuck you guys, I'm doing it." But Elron was secretly planning to use the funds for a luxurious world cruise, and apparently without Jack, because he and Sarah take the money and dip to Miami without him, where they buy 3 boats and start sailing out. Jack hears about this and, of course, performs a banishing ritual of the pentagram that contained an astrological, geomantic invocation of Bartzabel, which was a vengeance spirit from the planet Mars. It's a great spell, 10 of 10, would use again. Jack then flies to Florida and tracks down the couple, where he finds they had to return to shore because they hit a squall. Praise be to Bartzabel. Jack took them to court for reimbursement, but Sarah was like, "You better keep your mouth shut because we started hooking up before I was 18, and I bet everyone would absolutely love to hear about that." So Elron eventually only ends up having to pay Jack $2,900, while he then went on to bigamously marry Sarah and become the founder of Scientology. Jack and his fiery redhead Cameron got married after his divorce from Helen, right when the Red Scare is really hitting America. The Congressional House of Un-American Activities Committee begins screwing with people who they think have any commie sympathies or connections. Because of his Marxist college exploration phase at Caltech and his affiliation with those troublemakers at the ACLU, the FBI stripped Jack of his clearance and he was pretty much blacklisted in the Rocketeer community. He worked odd jobs and bootlegged nitroglycerin. Cameron ended up leaving him for an artist commune in Mexico after discovering he was cheating on her with an Irish woman. She lost her fucking mind on him, so he decided to initiate divorce proceedings against her, citing extreme cruelty. Wifeless, friendless, and with a shitty job, Jack continued his occult sex magic with prostitutes, until one day, in 1952, he gets a job opportunity in Mexico, and he calls up Cameron, and he's like, hey. And she's like, hey. And he goes, I got a job in Mexico, which is where I happen to know you are. And Cameron's like, oh, well, maybe you should come by. And he hangs up and he's like, yes, awesome. Okay, just have to do this rush order of explosives for this movie that just showed up here. And then I'm going to see my wife in Mexico. And he then proceeds to blow himself up. His forearm was amputated, his legs and left arm were broken, and he had a hole torn on the right side of his face. The Pasadena ran his obituary in June of 1952, and it went, John W. Parsons, handsome 37-year-old rocket scientist, killed Tuesday in a chemical explosion, was one of the founders of a weird, semi-religious cult that flourished here about 10 years ago. Old police reports yesterday pictured the former Caltech professor as a man who led a double existence, a down-to-earth explosives expert who dabbled in intellectual necromancy. Possibly he was trying to reconcile fundamental human urges with the inhuman, Buck Rogers type of innovations that sprang from his test tubes. His death has been the subject of debate, with a couple of friends saying it was a suicide or an assassination, because the unstable chemicals he mixed were contrary to the meticulousness he was known for as a chemist. Jack Parsons' death to this day remains a mystery surrounded by conspiracy theories. But the most likely theory can be credited to the artist Renate Drux, who believed that Jack had died in a rite designed to create a homunculus, which is a tiny humanoid being. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or corrections for me, let me know in the comments section. Have a dirty day.
Hey, this is Adam Nutter.
And this is Greg Trout. Come check out our podcast, Nerds with Words. Adam and I talk about pop culture, comedy, comic books, movies, conspiracies. We're both comedians and we might make you laugh. Every week we welcome a guest from the entire spectrum of pop culture and science and comedy. You can follow us on Twitter at NerdsWithWords1.